Greetings fellow guitar travellers, it's Rowan J Parker here, back with another episode of Theory and Harmony, and today back at the old Joanna, and we're going to be looking at suspended chords, explaining to you exactly what they are, how they work, and hopefully how to use them. Alright, now before we do that, an inevitable plug for the website, www.rowanjparker.com. Great site with tons of free stuff on it. Get even more free stuff if you subscribe to the site. Just stick your email address in the subscribe box, hit subscribe, even more free stuff. Otherwise, extra free things, more goodies. You can look at my stuff on SoundCloud, lots of backing tracks there to jam over, all free, all downloadable. If you want to support me, you can do that in two ways. You can either go to the web store, where I've got tons of products available at very reasonable prices, or you can donate to me on Patreon. I've set up a Patreon account. And if you want to support me producing all these free and hopefully useful and wonderful videos, go into Patreon and you can subscribe or donate as much or as little as you like. You start with $1. If you donate more than $5, I will personally send you a video about anything you like. But don't push it. Alright, so otherwise on YouTube obviously, which you're watching, YouTube channel Rowan J Parker, on Facebook it's Rowan J Parker, on Twitter as well. So all of my accounts, it's easy to remember, just search for Rowan J Parker, Google search, and it comes up with a whole load of horribleness. Alright, so anyway, enough of that. On today's lesson we're going to be getting into suspended chords. Alright, let's do it. Okay, first things first, what is a suspended chord? Well, to answer that question, first of all, we need to know what a triad is. And what a triad is a basic three-note chord. So for instance, this is the triad of C major. And these are the notes of C, E and G, which is a root, major third and perfect fifth. Or if you prefer the American or jazz nomenclature, it would be 1, 3, 5. Alright, so root, major third, perfect fifth. You can change a major triad into a minor triad just by taking the third degree, in this case the note of E in a C major chord, and dropping it to E flat. And this will change the quality of the chord from C major to C minor. So here's major, here's C minor. Oh, you know what that is, don't you? That's you have to excuse my awful piano playing. I've never claimed to be much of a piano player, but it's quite easy to see visually on the piano in a way that probably the guitar isn't, because here's the third. Alright, so there are other sorts of triads which we won't get into today, as well as major and minor triads. There are also diminished and augmented triads, but we don't really need to know about them today. So we're just going to focus on the major and minor triads. So, what does the suspended bit of suspended actually mean? Now, a lot of people think that when they hear a suspended chord, for instance this sound, you think, oh, that sounds kind of quite interesting and floaty sounding, sort of like him floating above the air, like suspended, and they think that's what it means. It's not what it means at all. In this case, the use of the word suspended is this. Let's imagine that back in your school days you were very, very naughty, misbehaved, set fire to the science classroom with a large amount of Semtex. What happened to you? Well, you were put out on your ass. You were suspended for a few days. You know, if you got into a fight or something like that happened to me once, punched someone straight in the face, bang, suspended for 3 days. Now, what does that mean in that context? If you're suspended from school, it means that you're basically told to go home and don't come back for some time. And in this case, that's the meaning of the word suspended. It means that a particular note in the chord is removed or suspended. So what note is actually removed? Well, it is the note which defines the chord, whether it's major or minor. So the note that is suspended is the third, i.e. it is removed. And all we're left with, if the third is suspended, is a root and a fifth. Okay? So the third, major third, E, or minor third, E flat, is chucked out, removed, thrown out for fighting or setting fire to the science class. It's removed, but it's replaced with something. It's replaced with a much better behaved student, which is either the second or fourth degree of the scale. If the third is replaced by the second degree of the scale, it's called suspended second. If the third is replaced by the fourth degree of the scale, it's called suspended fourth. So let me just show you that. Here's, for instance, suspended second. So what is the second degree of a C major scale? It is D. So the D note will replace the E note in the chord. Right, so if we do that, we get this, we get C, D and G. And this makes the chord C suspended second or C sus2. Okay, if we want C sus4, then what we do is we replace our removed third with the fourth degree of the scale, which in this case is the note of F. When we do that, we get C suspended fourth. Okay, now those are the only two flavours or varieties of suspended chords you get. You can either get suspended second or suspended fourth. There's no such thing as, say, suspended ninth or suspended seventh or any other number. It's either just 2 or 4. Now sometimes in certain chords the 4 can be described up an octave in terms of being an 11th, or the second can be described up an octave in terms of being a 9th, but fundamentally these are the only two suspended sounds you get. Now do you notice when you play suspended chords they have a certain width to them that triads don't? I always find the basic, major and minor triads, for instance here's D major, they sound quite pleasant, but they're extremely plain sounding and quite dictatorial. There's not very much you can do with that sound. It's not very wide, it's not very colourful. However, I do this, suddenly there's space in the chord, there's ambiguity in the chord, there's more tension and interest in the chord, which personally I find appealing. So, using suspended chords, whether it's suspended second or suspended fourth, is a way of increasing the width of the chord and making the harmony sound a lot more interesting and possibly ambiguous. Alright, so there is the basic description of what suspended second and suspended fourth chords actually are. Let's go on now to talk a little bit about context and explain to you how you can use sus chords. Now here is possibly one of the most common and traditional use of suspended chords. Let me play you this chord sequence. Okay, in that chord progression I played C, and then F, and then this chord G suspended fourth, and then G major triad, resolving to C. So the most common use, or the most traditional use of a sus4 chord is to place it on the 5th degree of the key. So if you're in the key of C major, the 5th chord in the key of C would be a G or a G7. That would be an ideal place to put the suspension. So you'd have C, F, G sus4 or G7 sus4, resolving to either G or G7, then resolving to C. And the reason this works is because the 5th chord of the key, the dominant chord of the key, wants very much to resolve to the tonic. It really wants to go home, alright? So the more you can make it go home, the more tension you can introduce into the dominant chord will enable the resolution to occur with a greater sense of strength and finality than it might otherwise. So you might play something like this, which is just G to C, but if we put the suspended fourth on it, see this increases the tension on the dominant chord, which is then somewhat released by going to the plain dominant triad and then resolving to the 1 chord. So. So that's an incredibly common use, and probably the most common use of suspended chords, is you add the sus4 suspension onto the dominant chord or the 5 chord of the key that you're in. Alright, here's another use of suspended chords. You can use suspended chords to increase the interest of a otherwise very, very boring chord progression. Here's a very boring and common chord progression. Here's D minor, then C, and then go to B flat, go back to C. And this is a very common chord progression in rock. I'm sure you've heard this before. Right, so one of the things we can do to try and increase the width of the chord progression is just remove all the thirds of the chords and replace them with suspended seconds. So here we go. D sus2, C sus2, B flat sus2, C sus2, back to D sus2. So I think you can hear in that case that it really does increase the width of the harmony. the shoddy piano playing, but you can get the idea of what adding the suspended seconds into the chords does. It increases the width of the harmony and makes it just sound more interesting and stops all your chord progression sounding so ordinary and boring. Because getting back to the point I made earlier on, I find triads to be just massively dictatorial and not to say boring, and they just don't inspire me to write anything good. So a long time ago, before I knew much about music theory or harmony, I stumbled upon suspended second chords, and I really liked the way they sounded, and I used them a lot, and I still use them today. Notable players who use a lot of suspensions in their compositions: the great piano player Bruce Hornsby. If you're familiar with Bruce Hornsby in the range, uses a lot of these sorts of open sounding ambiguous chords in his compositions. It's possibly one of the reasons I love his music. Alright, now otherwise what you will find is the suspended fourth chord, discussing that briefly, it can be just generally used as a colour motion on a chord. So for instance, what's very common is these sorts of sounds. Where the suspended fourth chord resolves to its major counterpart. So for instance, in this case, D sus4 resolves to D, C sus4 resolves to C, A sus4 resolves to A, G sus4 resolves to G. Now none of those sounds are actually diatonic to each other, none of them belong in the same key. You're just treating the sus4 as if it's a motion or colour on any of the chords. Now, just to point out that sus4 will work equally well resolving to major or minor. So you can have C sus4, for instance, resolving to C major. Very happy to do that. It's also equally happy really to resolve to minor. Have a listen. So I play. So you hear that works as well. So suspended fourth chords can be used just as general colorizations to chords. Examples of that, a couple of examples. Pinball Wizard by The Who, it just uses suspended chords on each degree of the chord progression as a color. Other examples, Eric Clapton's song called Behind the Mask does this as well. Another song that does this, cult song called Love Removal Machine, which probably none of you know, unless you're from the 80s like me. But the point is, you hear these things all the time. You'll be especially familiar with this if you listen to any of the music of The Who. I mean, suspended fourth chords are really just very, very generic and widely used in all of rock music. Okay, well, I think that'll wrap up for suspended chords today. There's more to say about it, no doubt, but getting to everything that you could possibly get into, this video might go on forever. So, to avoid that, let's just wrap up there. Don't forget to subscribe to the website, and if you can, support me on Patreon. Give whatever you can manage. Any help is supported to keep making these free and hopefully useful videos. Alright, well, I'll catch you out next time, another episode of Music Theory. Music in Harmony, I should say. Music in Harmony. Until then, from J. Parker, farewell!